Think back to Australia in the mid-1970s. Lots of strikes, the Whitlam government in deep trouble. A growing controversy over American bases like Pine Gap. The Governor-General, Sir John Kerr, more and more involved in a parliamentary crisis regarding supply. All that, as it turned out, marked the start of a truly amazing spy story. Christopher Boyce at that time was a young telex operator working for an American company known as TRW. It was a private company that had close connections with the US government, particularly the CIA, because TRW helped run America's super-secret spy satellite system. And being where he was, Boyce occasionally came across telex messages. In this story, you'll hear them referred to as Twixers, and other material pertaining to CIA activity in Australia. And what he heard and saw made him so angry that his own country could cheat such a good ally as Australia that he decided to start selling information to the Russians. He was caught and convicted in 1977, one of the most important spies since World War II. He staged a daring escape and was recaptured only last year. Since then, the big American media groups have been trying to get his story. But instead, he agreed to speak only to us in a remarkable meeting that took place at Leavenworth Prison in Kansas. So why choose us?
Because you're Australian journalists, and because what kicked this all off was deceptions by my government against yours.
What you did has been described as the greatest security breach in decades.
Serves them right.
Serves them right.
It's my feeling on it. I have no regrets. What was going on in Australia, what the Twixes I saw concerning your labor unions, like you say, kicked it off. But my primary purpose was personal grudge.
I don't want to be overly dramatic at all, but I mean, did you want to be a martyr?
I thought it was a unique way to express myself.
Only the Russians know exactly what secrets Christopher Boyce gave them. But the CIA calls what he did the most damaging act of espionage in decades. Boyce says that what finally turned him into a spy was America's deception of Australia.
My government was deceiving an ally that had been an ally for 2 world wars, English-speaking parliamentary democracy. I thought it was indicative to what my country had sunk to.
This is Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary in Kansas. It's a maximum security prison. And right now there are 1,030 men locked up inside here. All of them are regarded as highly dangerous. There are kidnappers, hijackers, mass murderers, and others. And there's also Christopher Boyce, the former Catholic altar boy who thought that for a while he might become a priest, but instead ended up as a notorious Russian spy.
All right, so we'll have to go ahead and take a look at the articles in here.
It's almost as difficult getting into Leavenworth as it is getting out.
Can I open it up?
Yeah, that's fine. It's a film magazine. It's much the same. The rest is just film. What exactly are you looking for?
Well, articles of contraband, your narcotics, weapons, drugs, anything of this nature.
Boyce's new quarters in maximum security are a stark contrast to his family home in Palos Verdes in Southern California. His was a safe, affluent, comfortable childhood. The eldest of 9 children, with a strict Catholic mother and an FBI agent father, Boyce was the student athlete with an IQ of 140. But the all-American schoolboy grew up to be a traitor.
Well, I have no problems with the label traitor if you qualify what it's to, and I think that eventually the United States government is going to involve the world in the next World War, and being a traitor to that, I have absolutely no problems with that whatsoever.
Had you ever been one of those my country right or wrong kids?
Absolutely. I was brought up in a very conservative home, the right of Kubla Khan. As I got older, I just came to see that most everything that I believed in was hypocrisy in this country. That things just aren't as they appear.
Do you think that shock would have been any less if you hadn't been brought up in such a strictly conservative family?
Well, yeah, that never would have happened. what has transpired never would have happened.
Are you or were you ever a communist?
No.
He is rebellious, adventurous, ideological, nonconformist.
Bill Doherty once worked for the FBI. Now he's Boyce's lawyer.
I don't know if it's enough reason or not, but that's probably why he did what he did.
But why do you think? I mean, if you had to explain it to someone, why he sold secrets to the Russians?
I think that the main reason was adventure. Then I think it was adventure in the crucible of the times, the Vietnam War, the disillusionment of American youth, being fed into slaughter time and time again for no reason. I think these were some of the reasons he did what he did.
Christopher Boyce worked here in Southern California for 2 years. It may not look like it, but TRW is a top-secret installation. This is where they build satellites for the CIA, including the black satellites that spy on Russia and China and use Pine Gap as a relay station for sending information back here to the United States. Now, within TRW, the most highly classified area was a place called the Black Vault. That was a room where they kept the messages and the codes. Now, to work in there, you need to be passed by the FBI to get a clearance then from the CIA, and beyond that, a clearance from the National Security Agency. At 21 and a college dropout, Christopher Boyce had them all. Now, for other California kids, if they wanted to protest, they could smoke dope, or they could burn their draft cards, or they could join the anti-war marches. For Christopher Boyce, he had something else.
Well, I was pretty well astounded with all the gadgetry and what was going on, and the fact that I had access to all this information. I had never in my wildest dreams ever occurred to me that when I went to work for TRW that I would be in fact privy to information like that. It was pretty shocking.
How did a 21-year-old dropout, earning $140 a week, get access to those kinds of secrets?
Well, through the old boy network, his father had been an FBI agent. The chief of TRW security had been an FBI agent.
He said that. Is that all it takes?
That's all it takes. They had absolutely no security in the Black Vault at TRW. Absolutely no security. The uncontradicted evidence in the trial is that there was a telephone with an extension cord outside the vault that could reach in, and theoretically he could have sat at the code machine and read the code coming directly from Langley CIA headquarters and dictated on the telephone to anywhere in the world. You can't even do that at a racetrack.
Boyce was a telex operator for a number of CIA projects, including the Rhyolite and Argus projects. These were sophisticated, highly classified spies in the sky, monitoring and photographing military bases and missile launches in the Soviet Union and China. Because Pine Gap in the Northern Territory was an absolutely vital cog in the CIA's spy satellite network, Canberra and Washington had signed an executive agreement under which Australia was to share this secret information.
Information derived from the research programs conducted at the facility shall be shared by the two governments.
Boyce and his espionage accomplice, Andrew Dalton Lee, sold the Russians the codes and other secret details of both the Rhyolite and Argus projects. According to Boyce, that's much more than America's partner, Australia, ever got.
When the Rhyolite project was first put in place, the executive agreement meant that all information was to be shared between the American government and the Australian government. And along came Mr. Whitlam. When I went to work for the project, the initial security briefing that I had, I was told that, in fact, we weren't going to live up to that agreement and that we hadn't been, and that there was information that was being withheld, and also that the Argus project, which was the advanced Rhyolite project, was to be hidden from Australians.
But you were told specifically that by your...
By Rick Smith, the security project director.
Was he CIA?
Former.
So you were told that the Americans would not live up to the agreement that they had.
That all information wouldn't be shared, no, and wasn't being shared.
I mean, that's very important. I mean, it was no attempt to try and hide it. That was part of your briefing.
Definitely, yeah.
Were you aware, though, that those American bases in Australia had become a very hot political issue?
Not to the extent that it was, but there was definitely conversations in the Black Vault and in the security area with members of TRW security about the problem of Mr. Whitlam.
Well, they spoke openly about this, did they?
Well, yes, Mr. Whitlam was not a popular figure at all, to say the least.
Did they say why?
Well, first of all, it's politics, socialistic, and the fact that inquiries were being made about the base. Mr. Whitlam was, by wanting to know what was going on there and by publicizing it, was compromising the integrity of the project.
Compromising the integrity, was that?
That's a familiar term that I heard quite a bit.
Did you
Mr.
get
Whitlam had no business sniffing around the Rhyolite project. To their view, he was on the wrong ball club.
even though the bases were in Australia?
Well, yes, Mr. Whitlam's government was a threat.
That's the way they described it.
Yes.
Did you get the impression that things had changed once the Labor government, the Whitlam government, came into office from what they had been before? And did they change after he left?
It was a bit of celebration that Mr. Whitlam had been canned, but my instructions as to what was to be sent on to Marino and Casino.
And Marino Casino was Canberra, and Marino was Alice Springs.
Correct. Did not change, no.
So after Mr. Fraser was elected Prime Minister after Mr. Whitlam, the instructions were still the same?
Remain the same.
Did they talk about how or why he was forced out?
No, but there was references to your Governor General by the Central Intelligence residents there at TRW in the Rhyolite Project. They called Mr. Kerr, our man Kerr.
What, the CIA man said that?
Yes, Joe Harrison said that in the security area. One time I ever heard that.
Christopher Boyce telling what he knows about the CIA and its meddling in Australian politics. But he goes on to mention other disturbing events, including CIA infiltration of Australian unions. More of that part of the spy's story after this break. More of the story of Christopher Boyce, the disillusioned spy. As he told us in our meeting at Leavenworth Prison, he went over to the Russians after discovering some of the dirty tricks the CIA was ready to play on a good ally like Australia. Working as he did on the US spy satellite program, Boyce could talk to CIA agents and read various telex messages, or as he called them, Twixes, coming from and to Australia. What you'll hear next are details of how the CIA infiltrated Australian unions, and more of its double dealings even when the new Conservative government of Malcolm Fraser came to power. That was after the sacking of the Whitlam government by this man, the then Governor-General, Sir John Kerr.
There was references to your Governor-General by the Central Intelligence residents there at TRW in the Rhyolite Project. They called Mr. Kerr, our man Kerr.
Just 2 days before a federal parliamentary debate was due on the American satellite bases, a CIA telex arrived in Canberra. It warned that Prime Minister Whitlam was in danger of blowing the lid off Pine Gap. The next day, the Whitlam Labor government was dismissed.
The proclamation, which you have just heard read by the Governor-General's official secretary, was countersigned Malcolm Fraser, who will undoubtedly go down in Australian history from Remembrance Day 1975 as Kerr's Kerr.
How long did this deception, to use your word, how long did that go on?
Concerning the
Australia.
Argus project and the not sharing the information, the entire time I worked for the people, and I imagine it continued right up until the point of my trial until the executive agreement was renegotiated.
So at least 2 years, the 2 years that you were there.
Yes, it never changed.
In your trial, you mentioned interference in the Australian unions. What was that?
In this particular instance, we had hardware, software, and personnel to ship out to Alice Springs, and there was worry over strikes at your airports. They had to do with pilots and air controllers. And here was an area that peddle had a definite need to know because...
That's TRW.
Right. Because strikes would wreck our schedule. And so in this one instance, a twitch came from Pilot, which said, Pilot will continue to suppress the strikes, continue shipment on schedule. Words to that effect.
So Pilot was the CIA headquarters at Langley?
Langley, Virginia, yes. The hub of the entire intelligence operation.
Was there any more discussion about that? I mean, what did that imply? That the CIA had infiltrated those unions?
Well, my conclusion is that either Central Intelligence directly or through intermediaries would have to have infiltrated the hierarchy of your trade unions at some level.
So Boyce now had the motivation for espionage, what he calls the CIA's deception and interference in Australia. Working inside the Black Vault at TRW gave him the opportunity. For 2 years, Christopher Boyce found it ridiculously simple to steal America's most highly prized secrets and hand them to the Russians.
My superiors would send me on booze runs to the liquor store, and they would send me out with a satchel past the guards. The guards knew what the satchel was for, never interfered with what was in it. That way I could take out whatever I wanted. Bringing it back in was a bit more of a trouble if I had to keep it overnight.
So you take out the top secret information on the American satellite system under the pretext of going out to get some liquor?
Many times, yeah.
And how did you get it back?
I had a roll of documents, hundreds and hundreds of them, that I had taken out in the satchel. I bought a pot that evening, put the documents in a plastic bag, set them in the pot, put dirt over the documents, took a plant that I had bought in a store, stuck that in the top of the dirt, went into the guard and told him to go out to my car and bring in the potted plant and put it in the security area.
So the guard brought back the documents?
Yeah.
Was there no
Keystone
trouble?
Cops.
Pardon?
Keystone Cops.
But was there no trouble in terms of getting that out? I mean, if you really determined to take out one of these top secret documents, you could do it.
Yes.
Time and time again.
Mm-hmm.
Take them out, photograph them.
Or photograph them inside. I sometimes would just bring the Knox camera inside and do it in the Black Vault. But then no one had access there but myself and a limited amount of other people.
Well, that Black Vault you speak of, I mean, there are stories there of booze parties, of sex parties.
Marijuana growing in the plants inside the communications room. Pretty wild scene. I walked into it. The Black Vault was almost like the Project Bar. We used to make daiquiris in the document destruction blender.
What, the CIA shredder?
Yes.
To make daiquiri drinks?
Put it to some use.
Now that's the center. That's where the top information.
They were doing it before I got there. It wasn't my idea, but made a hell of a daiquiri.
Was there an excitement of being in espionage? Was there a thrill to that?
21 years old, it's quite a thrill, yes. It's high adventure.
High adventure and pretty dangerous stuff.
It's a little hard on your adrenaline gland, but it's a very exciting thing to become involved in. There's no way around that. You never knew when they were coming to get you. It tainted everything else in your life. As much as you tried to lead a normal life, above board, regular, you still had this other life behind the curtain, which at any moment could destroy everything else you had.
How much were you paid by the Russians?
Personally, or about $20,000. Money was never important to me. I knew from the beginning that I would eventually be caught. There was no escape from it.
Once you'd started, there was no escape?
Absolutely not. After all, I'm an amateur, 21 years old, and the Central Intelligence Agency had been in business a lot longer than I had. And to tell you the truth, I didn't think it would go on longer for a month or two. And I was amazed that it went on for 2 years, almost 2 years.
Boyce was finally caught in January 1977. Tried and convicted of espionage, he got the maximum, 40 years. But just 2 years later, Boyce went over the wall and escaped from Lompoc Federal Prison in California.
There were reports at the time that the fact you got out of Lompoc, that you could only have done it with the help of either the Russians or with the help of the CIA.
I did it with the help of the incompetency of the United States Bureau of Prisons. I had no outside help.
What'd you order this stuff for? You don't look like the painting type to me.
Bureau of Prisons showed a movie, Escape from Alcatraz, and it's a true story. A man escapes from Alcatraz by making a papier-mâché dummy, putting it in his bed, and he's counted it, and then he leaves. I then went to the arts and crafts people at the prison and asked them for a papier-mâché class, which they then showed me how to make the dummy, really, and I did exactly what was in the movie. I just repeated it. Made the dummy, put it in the bed, and meanwhile I was out in a drain by the fence, at the fences, and the dummy was counted. So I had an 8-hour jump on them. And then I went over the fence through the razor wire in front of a tower, but the guard in the tower wasn't on the ball.
Once outside, Boyce survived alone in the woods for months, living off acorns and berries he'd read about in the prison library books.
There were reports at the time that you'd gone to South Africa. Did you go to South Africa?
No, I didn't go to South Africa.
Australia? Alice Springs?
No, I missed out on that too.
Were there times when you came close to being caught in those 19 months you were away?
I was pulled over by 6 officers up in Bonners Ferry, Idaho, late at night with no ID, driving the car, but up in Idaho, and they asked me where I was going, and I mentioned a friend of the sheriff's, and let me go.
This is perhaps at that stage, the most wanted fugitive in the country.
Well, that's how they classified it. Then up in Idaho during the 80 elections, I was sitting in a restaurant in Sandpoint called Connie's, eating a ham and egg omelet. In walked Senator Church campaigning with his whole entourage, reporters, bodyguards, and he worked the restaurant, came up to my table, shook my hand, and told me how much he needed my vote. Ruined my breakfast.
But obviously someone was looking after you at that stage. Luck was on your side. Did you?
I've always been incredibly lucky.
But you weren't when you were
lucky to
caught.
escape. I was lucky that it continued for 2 years as it had. Incredible luck.
But your luck ran out.
Luck always does.
Now, you were close to escaping again, weren't you?
Yeah, I was taking pilot lessons up on the coast of Washington. I was being instructed by a brigadier general in the Air Force, General Georgie, which made me a little nervous.
He didn't know who you were?
No, but I had 2 weeks to go to get my pilot's license, and then I would have left the country. So the government caught me within 2 weeks of my complete freedom.
Why did you stay around for so long? I mean, you were in the country for 19 months. Why did you go, for example, to Russia?
Well, I tell you, if you've ever gone to Boundary County, Idaho, it's some awful nice country, and I had a whole lot of friends up there, and there were so many neat things to do, and I did a lot of hunting, and I hunted bear and elk, and I liked it up there.
So many neat things to do. That doesn't sound like the number one.
Well, I'm not a professional spy, and I'm not a professional anything. I'm an amateur at everything I do, or else I wouldn't be here right now, sitting here in this prison.
Boyce robbed 17 small banks whilst on the run. Bank cameras filmed this hold-up with Boyce in disguise. Finally recaptured by the FBI, he was sentenced to a further 25 years in prison. And that was on top of his 40 years for espionage.
It is a terrible waste. Depending on who you want to believe, which study, he's got an IQ of 127 or 140. He's a personable, charming guy. Young man, I should say. He is a student of history. Women like him. I don't want to say that he's a ladies' man in that sense, but young girls are drawn to him.
Was there any other way to do it?
I suppose there was, but I was 21 and saw things black and white, and it seemed to me my government had betrayed me long before I ever betrayed them.
Prison warders are taking no chances this time around. Only 3 men have escaped from maximum security here at Leavenworth, and they don't intend Boyce to be number 4.
Stand there a second. Okay, Gary, you've got one.
But if there's no hope of getting out, then Boyce says he'll have to consider suicide.
It would be a viable option.
If the front door was opened, would you walk out?
Take off like a jackrabbit.
Christopher Boyce didn't kill or kidnap anybody. He's just not a violent man. But what he did do was commit treason. And nobody loves a Russian spy, whatever the reason. As Boyce himself says, the chances of him getting parole are next to nil. So unless he escapes once again, which seems unlikely, unless he's murdered in here, which is always on the cards, or unless there's some kind of a deal, which nobody's talking about, Christopher Boyce is going to be 94 years old before he walks out of these doors here at Leavenworth.
I think that if Mr. Nixon's government hadn't gone down in flames, I don't think that this would have happened. But at the same time, it goes way beyond Richard Nixon and Watergate. I think that it's just the whole general drift of where this government is headed. I think that this government is a threat to mankind. You can't protect freedom and liberties behind stockpiles of chemical and biological weapons and nuclear weapons. My government built atomic weapons, used them first, stockpiled them first, murdered our ICBMs first, which was a grotesque escalation, and now that the Russians have played catch-up for 20 years and finally achieved equality, the only policy to come out of the White House is build 17,000 more of the monsters, and to me that's madness.
Your motivation is not pro-Russia as against anti-Washington, anti-American.
Correct.
Could it be said that in giving those secrets to the Russians, that in fact you'd thrown into jeopardy the lives of every American man, woman and child?
They're already in jeopardy. Third World War is inevitable.
So you don't think you added to that at all?
It's a hard one.